Ladies and gentlemen, after 4 months of long, arduous, difficult negotiations, I am really proud and pleased to announce that Democrats and Republicans in the Senate have come to an agreement on the bipartisan supplemental bill tonight.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, kicks off what may be the fight that defines the 2024 election. A bipartisan compromise has been put together in the U.S. Senate, with lead negotiators James Langford, Republican of Oklahoma, Kirsten Sinema, Independent of Arizona, and Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut. Together, the three of them, along with fellow negotiators and participants from the White House, have put together a compromise bill that funds border security, also funds Ukraine and Israel, our support in those conflicts abroad. But as might be expected, this bill is already facing enormous blowback, and it just might be enough to kill it before it ever gets out of the Senate. What am I talking about? Hang on, folks. We're going to get into all this in just 1 second.
My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk.
At 6:40 p.m. Eastern Sunday evening, February the 4th, the text of the 270-page compromise bill on border security, Ukraine funding, and funding for Israel was released for public consumption. And needless to say, this thing has absolutely set off a firestorm not only on Capitol Hill, but all over social media. So we're going to take a look tonight at what are the main components of the bill and look at the political reaction and give a little bit of analysis. We'll be doing some follow-up videos on this, getting into more specifics about what is the good and the bad of the bill, which, needless to say, from my perspective, I don't think there's a whole lot of good and there's definitely a whole lot of bad. But anyway, let's get into this as we might. We'll start with Reuters. Headline: U.S. Senate unveils $118 billion bipartisan bill on border security with aid for Ukraine and Israel. Article written by Richard Cowan and Kostas Pitas. We read the following. The U.S. Senate on Sunday unveiled a $118 billion bipartisan border security bill that would also provide aid to Ukraine and Israel following months of negotiations. But the measure faces an uncertain future amid opposition by Donald Trump and hardline Republicans. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said he would take steps to hold an initial vote on the bill on Wednesday. If the bill were to become law, it would mark the most significant changes in U.S. immigration and border security in decades. Some progressive Democrats are angry the measure does nothing to provide a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented people who have lived in the United States for many years, including, quote, dreamer immigrants who were brought into the country as children. Independent Senator Kirsten Sinema told reporters the legislation would secure the southern border, including by requiring the Department of Homeland Security to temporarily, quote, shut down the frontier to most migrants if there are an average of more than 5,000 crossings attempted per day over 7 days. In addition to $20.23 billion for border security, the bill includes $60.06 billion to support Ukraine in its war with Russia, $14.1 billion in security assistance for Israel, $2.44 billion to U.S. Central Command and the conflict in the Red Sea, and $4.83 billion to support U.S. partners in the Indo-Pacific facing aggression from China, according to figures from Senator Patty Murray, who chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee. An additional $10 billion would provide humanitarian assistance for civilians in conflict zones, including Ukraine, Gaza, and the West Bank, although the bill includes a provision barring its funds from going to the UN Agency for Palestinians, UNRWA. The Biden administration and other nations have paused funding to the agency over allegations that some of its staff were involved in the Hamas October 7th attacks in southern Israel. Where does the $118 billion in the U.S. Senate bill go? Quote, the priorities in this bill are too important to ignore and too vital to allow politics to get in the way, Schumer said in a statement. The United States and our allies are facing multiple complex and in places coordinated challenges from adversaries who seek to disrupt democracy and expand authoritarian influence around the globe. The key overseas security provisions of the bill largely match what President Joe Biden requested from Congress in October when he asked for additional funds for aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Okay, let's get into this. So the text of the bill is out. Everybody can see it, and they are analyzing it. And believe me, the analysis that they're coming up with just from a cursory look at this thing is making a lot of people just hold their nose and try to keep themselves from gagging over the whole thing. That's how bad the stench is coming off of it. But let's look at the reaction from some of the players. We'll start first with Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. From his Twitter page, we read the following. The bipartisan agreement in the Senate is tough, fair, and takes meaningful steps to address the challenges our country faces after decades of congressional inaction. It would allow DHS to remove more quickly those who do not establish a legal basis to remain in the United States, reducing the time from years to months. It would expedite protection and work authorization for those with legitimate claims. It would provide flexibility to respond to changing dynamics at the border, including temporarily prohibiting border entries for certain individuals when encounters are extremely high. It also delivers much-needed resources to support and expand the DHS workforce after decades of chronic underfunding, and it would further invest in technologies to prevent fentanyl from entering our country at the ports of entry. This agreement builds on the administration's approach of strengthened consequences for those who cross the border unlawfully without curtailing the development of lawful, safe, and orderly pathways for those who qualify. While it will take time to fully implement these new measures, the new enforcement tools and resources this proposal offers will further strengthen our ability to enforce the law in the months and years ahead, and we will begin implementing them as soon as it becomes law. I thank the bipartisan group of senators who came together over the past several months to craft this legislation. The proposals are the products of extensive negotiations and conversations. Well, he's just all happy with himself, but that sort of begs the question, should we, the American people, be happy with it? Well, like I said, I've had a chance to just do a cursory look as fast as I can before coming to you with this video, and I will be following this up with some other videos about it throughout the week. But from everything I've seen so far, I'm not sold on this thing. I've got any number of different questions. But we'll start by taking a look at the specific breakdown of where this money is going. So, $118.28 billion national security supplemental package includes $60.06 billion to support Ukraine as it fights against Putin's invasion, $14.1 billion in security assistance for Israel, $2.44 billion to support operations of CENTCOM in the Red Sea, $10 billion in humanitarian assistance to provide food, water, and shelter for medical care in other places at Gaza, the West Bank, Ukraine, $4.83 billion to support key regional partners in the Indo-Pacific, $2.33 to support for Ukrainians displaced by Putin's war of aggression, $20.23 billion to address existing operational needs and expand capabilities at the nation's borders. Resources: the new border policies included in the package and help stop the flow of fentanyl. $400 million for the nonprofit security grant program to help nonprofits and places of worship make security enhancements. Okay. I got a question before we even get any further into this. If this bill is all about securing the southern border of the United States and bringing an end to the years-long problems that have been going on, which I do acknowledge, there's problems with our immigration system and border enforcement. But if this is such a big deal, why are we tying funding for Ukraine to this? All right, well, take out Ukraine. Why are we tying funding for Israel to this? If this is such an important issue that has got to be resolved, why do you have to tie them together? Why can't you just do a separate, standalone bill having to do with border security and enforcement? Seems like a reasonable question to me. I mean, after all, what does funding Ukraine have to do with securing our southern border? Oh, now come on, Front Porch, you're just being over the top about this. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. If this is so important, that it's got to be dealt with. Okay, fine. I don't disagree with that. But why are you tying funding to other nations and military conflicts into our border security bill? Could it very well be that in reality, this is not so much about securing the southern border as it is about making sure we continue to fund what's going on in Ukraine and also try to help out our buddy Israel in the midst of their conflict? Well, I don't think that's too much of a stretch. I got a bad feeling that's exactly what's going on here. But let's get into some specifics, that criticisms that have been brought up already about this thing. We start with the Twitter page of Senator Mike Lee. Quote, "This is worse than bad negotiation. It's betrayal. The Senate GOP can stop this if 41 of us will stand together." Needless to say, he's not real happy. Let's take a look around what other people have to say about this. Marco Rubio, who at one time was a principal negotiator trying to get an amnesty bill done, says he is a no on this, which isn't too surprising, as I am not mistaken, Rubio's up for re-election this year. Now, that also gets to another question that I have about all this. Okay, so the bill's been released tonight. Fine. Has anybody heard from Sherrod Brown of Ohio? Has anybody heard from Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin? Has anybody heard from John Tester of Montana? Has anybody heard from any Democrat who's up for re-election this year? See, I got a funny feeling that if this thing dies in the Senate, which I think is a very good possibility, that it's not just going to be Republicans who wind up killing this thing, although 41 of them by themselves could do it. They'd have the numbers to make it happen. I've got a feeling you're going to get some Senate Democrats who are going to balk at this thing, especially realizing that they're in a state where if Donald Trump does very well as the Republican nominee, assuming, of course, he gets the nomination, which I don't think is too much of a stretch, that they vote for this thing, Donald Trump and whoever they're running against as their Republican opponent will absolutely beat them over the head with this vote. So keep an eye on the reactions from people like Sherrod Brown of Ohio. Keep an eye on reactions from Bob Casey of Pennsylvania. Keep an eye on John Tester of Montana. Keep an eye on Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin. Keep an eye on Jackie Rosen out in Nevada. Just keep an eye on all those folks, because they very well might be the ones that wind up killing this, more so than the Senate Republicans. But let us continue on with some reactions to this thing. Well, one of the principal sponsors is already getting beef over this, and boy, is he getting it. It's bad. So much so that Senator James Langford, Republican from Oklahoma, one of the three principal negotiators in the Senate, took to Twitter to try to defend one part of the bill. Take a look at this. "The Border Emergency Authority has been the most misunderstood or maybe just misrepresented parts of this bill. Some people have said it would mean 5,000 people a day are coming into the country every day. That is absurd and untrue. The Emergency Authority is not designed to let 5,000 people in. It is designed to close the border and turn 5,000 people around." Well, as you might expect, upon seeing that, people began to take a look at the provisions that he was talking about. And Todd Starnes, an independent reporter on his own, came up with the following observation. From his Twitter page, he quotes Langford. Again, it's absurd to think this bill supports border security would agree to letting 5,000 people in a day illegally. Well, Senator, you go to the text of the bill. Mandatory activation. The Secretary of Homeland Security shall activate Border Emergency Authority if, during a period of 7 consecutive calendar days, there's an average of 5,000 or more aliens who are encountered each day, or on any one calendar day, a combined total of 8,500 or more aliens are encountered. Now, I'm no lawyer, and I'll freely admit that. I'm just a fellow that reads the news, but I have a question. Does that mean that the border emergency authority to shut down the border doesn't happen unless 35,000 individuals come in contact with somebody at the southern border? How is this not the very thing that Langford says is not going to happen. Again, call me crazy if you wish, but that's just sort of my observation. But anyway, let's go on to see what some other people have to say about this. Here's from J.D. Vance. This is great. And actually, he brings up a very valid point. Quote, "The House is impeaching Mayorkas next week, while the Senate will be voting to give him massive discretion to not enforce the border? Why would any Republican vote for this?" And it goes on to point out something that Mike Lee brought up. In general, and this is from the bill itself, whenever the Border Emergency Authority is activated, the Secretary shall have the authority and the Secretary's sole and unreviewable discretion to summarily remove and prohibit in whole or in part entry into the United States of any alien identified in subsection A3 who is subject to such authority in accordance with this subsection. And Vance's point is perfectly valid. You mean to tell me that the House is about ready to impeach the very man who this bill gives massive authority to? How does that even begin to make sense? But let us continue on, because there's various other reactions to this bill, and it's actually rather interesting. Oh my goodness. Here is from, again, Mike Lee, and this is quoted from Simon Atiba's page. Senator Mike Lee explodes after new Senate bill unveiled, writes, quote, "Democrats want to defund the police and immigration and customs enforcement in the U.S., but send $300 million to Ukrainian law enforcement and Ukrainian state border guard service." And if you're wondering what Mike Lee is talking about, take a look at this particular section of the bill. "That funds shall be made available in the proceeding proviso be made available to support the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine and the National Police of Ukraine, including units supporting or under the command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine." Now, say what you want to, but I think Lee's got a perfectly valid point here. There's a lot made about this $20 billion for border security, but why are we sending a lot of money overseas to help the Ukrainians secure their border when it's our border that's the one that's got the biggest problem right now? Just saying. Anyway, we continue on with reactions. Mike Cernovich, influencer and Twitter aficionado. "The same Republican senators trying to hold the country hostage by demanding $60 billion to Ukraine blocked Trump from building the wall in 2017 when Republicans held the House, the Senate, and the White House. Hell no to this blackmail bill." Well, we know where he stands on this thing. Now, lest you think that all the reaction to this is limited to individuals in the U.S. Senate, particularly on the Republican side, the House Republicans have already started weighing in on this, and one of the comments that I've heard is just absolutely comical, and I bring it to your attention. This is from the Twitter page of U.S. Representative Mike Collins. "This bill is the worst screwing in the Senate since that Dem staffer filmed his porno on Klobuchar's desk." Colorful. Okay, moving along. From Speaker Mike Johnson. "I have seen enough. This bill is even worse than we expected, and we won't come close to ending the border catastrophe the president has created. As the lead Democrat, the border never closes. If this bill reaches the House, it will be dead on arrival." And finally, from House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, "Let me be clear. The Senate border bill will not receive a vote in the House. Here's what the people pushing this bill aren't telling you. It accepts 5 million illegal immigrants a day and gives automatic work permits to asylum recipients, a magnet for more illegal immigration." And folks, I hate to say it, but I think Scalise is right. When you go back to that one provision that says the secretary has the authority to shut down the border if he runs into an average of 5,000 a day at the border or trying to cross the border over a 7-day period, that's, to me, just a recipe for more people crossing the border before you actually decide to shut it down. So, like I say, there's a lot about this bill that I think is extraordinarily problematic. But as it stands right now, the heat that's coming off of this thing is just absolutely ridiculous. Now, what do I think is going to happen? I could see one of two scenarios. A, the Senate Republicans who are opposed to this managed to cobble together the 41 votes they need, and no matter how much cajoling Schumer and McConnell do, they're not going to pass this thing. Like I said, if the Senate Republicans by themselves don't kill it, keep your eyes on Sherrod Brown of Ohio, John Tester of Montana, Jackie Rosen of Nevada, Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin, and others. Senate Democrats might wind up being the ones that actually kill this thing more so than the Senate Republicans, because McConnell is going to find a way to peel off votes as much as he can, if for no other reason, to keep money going to Ukraine. Now, we can sit and argue whether that's right or wrong, but that's probably what he's going to try and do. Option 2 says McConnell and Schumer managed to muscle this thing out of the House. It goes over to, out of the Senate, then it goes over to the House. Well, if Johnson is true to his word, this thing will never see the light of day. That would be enough to kill it. But there is a third possibility which really frightens me even more. Schumer and McConnell muscle this thing out of the Senate, and Mike Johnson goes weak at the knees, and this thing gets to a vote, and it passes. And let me tell you something. If that happens, the Republicans in the Congress can kiss goodbye any chance they've got of retaining the House or even getting the Senate back, because Republicans across the country and the grassroots will never forgive them for this. This would wind up being the ultimate betrayal. At a moment when they are perhaps on the cusp of winning back the White House with Donald Trump, for them to just give away one of the best issues they've got, immigration and border security, in a compromised bipartisan bill, is a betrayal that will not be forgotten and most certainly will never be forgiven. But that's what I think about what's going on right now. What do you think? As we start to wrap up this video, please do me some favors as always. Number 1, if you're not a subscriber to my channel, please do so. Number 2, please leave a comment below. I would love to know what you think about all this. Number 3, please share the video around. Number 4, hit the bell for notifications. I want to make sure you're always aware when new material is coming out. And finally, please give me a thumbs up. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative, and I'll see you next time.